around the world on your Android and Apple mobile devices.
The Simple Truth, rising up to explore the difficult topics of real life. Join us as we proclaim the good, the true, and the beautiful with the simple truth of Jesus Christ and His holy Catholic Church through Scripture, tradition, and the Catechism. And now, your host, Jim Havens.
It is great to be back with you on The Simple Truth, where we proclaim the life-giving reality of Jesus and His Catholic Church. We consecrate everything to the Sacred Heart of Jesus through the Immaculate Heart of Mary and the pure, strong heart of St. Joseph. It is Catholic Family Men Monday, where we primarily direct the content to men, most especially to those of us who are called to the vocation of marriage and family in order to build up husbands and fathers in Christ, to bless the family and sanctify the world. But make no mistake, everyone is certainly most welcome to listen in and or watch. Plenty here that is valuable and applicable to all. One great place that you can always listen in is on the website, brand new website for the Station of the Cross Catholic Media Network. You can go to thestationofthecross.com. But our guest today is Jason Craig, Catholic husband and father, co-founder and executive director for Fraternus, building brotherhood to mentor boys into virtuous Catholic men. You can learn more at fraternus.net. Also editor of Sword and Spade, a men's quarterly print magazine. TheSwordandSpade.com is where you can find it. He's also editor of ThoseCatholicMen.com and founder of St. Joseph's Farm, which hosts retreats that help men and their sons experience the joys and wisdom of traditional skills, crafts, and farming. stjosephsfarm.com, stjosephsfarm.com, and finally author of Leaving Boyhood Behind, Reclaiming Catholic Brotherhood, published by Our Sunday Visitor, osv.com. Jason Craig, great to have you back with us. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm better now talking to you, Jim.
Excellent. Well, I think we're going to have some fun over the hour. We'll put the phone number out in a little bit and invite the audience to chime in however they wish, any questions or comments on the topics we're discussing today, but certainly anything pertaining to manhood, what it means to be a Catholic man, raising up our sons to be virtuous Catholic men. All that's on the table and more. But the first thing that I do want to start with today is Sword and Spade, this quarterly print magazine of which you are the editor-in-chief. TheSwordandSpade.com is where folks can find it online. But this is a real magazine, print magazine. You can hold it in your hands. It comes to you quarterly, as was mentioned there. But this is great. A great experience to be able to receive something real in the mail, sit down with it, have a cup of coffee or whatever you like to do, sit there and do some reading and just not have to be reading off your phone or reading off of some sort of device, but to actually be reading this print magazine and great content. So tell us, how did it come to be, and what is the need you're seeking to meet with this magazine, Sword and Spade?
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, I can see on the back of your background there on the shelf, right? You've got the Katina Aria. Is that the orange set right
Yes.
there?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah,
so there's
Thomas
Aquinas on the shelf. You've got like 7 feet of probably some of the West's greatest wisdom, Aquinas, the philosophy, the theology of the church. It's amazing. What I have found in my own experience in life growing up and working with blue-collar men and then working in Fraternus, which is kind of, I say average Joe, and I mean that in the best way possible, just guys, is that they have a form of wisdom, this wisdom from the dirt up that is really necessary and gets missed. So there's this guy that I'm a big fan of named Peter Marin. He used to grapple with working man, but he was a brilliant guy, right? So he just was able to read very dense theology, philosophy, and he would often try to merge these worlds together and say, and his motto was, every working man a scholar and every scholar a working man. So first and foremost, we want to bring the wisdom and the experience of the nitty-gritty experience of men that are in the trenches, bring that into some sort of conversation and interaction with the intellectual tradition of the church, which is rich and it's true. But it's amazing to me, I don't know if you've experienced this, how often those truths they're not trickling down, so to speak. And a lot of men find themselves, even, we have this dearth of information, they find themselves confused, not knowing where to look. And they also dismiss their own wisdom, their own experience. They don't have good ways of tapping into that and seeing it as, this is how God teaches us. This is how wisdom grows in man. We learn through our senses, by experience. There's not another way to learn. That's just how it happens. So you in your life, you are gaining wisdom. I mean, even when you make your mistakes, you're gaining wisdom. And that form of wisdom, not through study, but through experience, is a necessary part of humanity. This is how God intends us, from our earliest stages. That's how we grow. That's how we understand. And then the mind learns to grapple with these things and really seize on the truth of things and of our experience. And that's what a man of wisdom actually is a man who knows how, not just who thinks well, but acts well. And in my experience, I find there's a lot of brilliant guys out there. They think really well, but they might not act well. And then there's guys that just have serious, strong, good, temperate, noble character, and they're unaware of the value of their character, and bringing those things kind of together in the magazine is the goal. So most of our authors are actually men in the trenches. So it's like our job as editors, and it's not just me. The joke is, people say, well, what's the magic of Sword and Spade? It's that my co-editor is a mechanic. Now, he's a bit more than a mechanic. He owns a successful automotive shop in downtown Birmingham, but he's a very serious, serious reader, very thoughtful man, perhaps even over and analytical, but he lives and breathes in a oily, greasy, gears and the working atmosphere. That's his daily atmosphere. And his wisdom that he's gained from being a father, from working in that kind of place, but also being a serious reader and somebody who's able to reflect and think, makes him a perfect, co-editor for a magazine like this. So bringing those, the working man and the scholar, bringing them together. The reason we decided on the print magazine is you mentioned it's not on a screen, we're not reading on a screen, and how different that is. And the fact is, it is very different. Most of us probably know this intuitively, but what your ability to read deeply on the screen is basically non-existent. The form of the screen itself lends itself more to distraction and to bouncing around lots of ideas, scanning, skimming. Reading on the screen is literally defined by being shallow. I mean, that is it does that on purpose. It's part of, and it actually alters our mind, like physically changes our brain, because your brain, like any muscle in your body, responds to what you ask it to do. So if you're constantly scrolling and bouncing around the internet and clicking and typing and doing and like moving around a lot, your brain actually learns to kind of skate on that surface level. And what it's doing is it's scanning for information all over the place. That has actually a detrimental effect on our ability to think well and to pray well, which is interesting because within our faith, in the liturgy, books, they have their own rubrics, right? We are, as Islam describes us, we are the people of the book, the sacred scriptures. We process with books around. One of our most treasured forms of prayer is Lectio Divina, the reading of books. Our faith is communicated by books. The truths are recorded in books. We're a bookish people, meaning we read deeply. That's literally what we do in our prayer, in our liturgy, things like that. So to have a mind that's trained to be shallow makes it harder for us to pray, makes it harder for us, and not just to pray as in Lectio Divina and thinking and meditating on the mysteries of our faith, the truth of our faith, but also in a man who lacks the depth of thought because he's unable to read and think, he's going to have less wisdom. So he might have all that experience I was praising a while ago, but if he kind of counters his experience by being indulgent on screens all the time, then it's not going to translate into true wisdom. His experience won't translate into wisdom. So all that being said, providing something to read on paper in the form of a magazine, we thought, well, hey, this is a good bridge. Because a lot of guys like, I hear you, I want to read more, I get it. But they don't know where to start. There's all kinds of books. You go to Amazon, everybody's got advice, everybody's got recommendations, and those are good. But as far as just the habit of taking an idea, sitting with it for a while, and following the conclusion of an author, we have found that a magazine, for example, this latest issue, you held it up on debt. We can take this idea of debt and relate it to debt as in the duty, that you might owe within your community, or education, that you have been educated by your community. What do you now owe them? Do you have a debt to those people that educated you? What do you owe them? Financial debt, the debt paid in purgatory. So anyway, it's a broad, lots of ideas, but it's one idea, and you can sit with it and you can think about, you can read these articles by men that you can relate to, but we try to make them intellectually serious so that you're not just amusing yourself. You're also not learning just for the sake of learning, but it is a constant challenge to apply these things. I hate to say apply them to your life. That sounds so cliche, but I think that has been the effect on men, and we get a ton of responses, the gratitude that men have that they haven't read like this, and there isn't publications like this, particularly for men. In fact, I keep hearing people say there's no magazine for Catholic men out there, and I say, au contraire, we have something. So anyway, I don't know if that's too much or too little, but there's a lot of good reasons to start a magazine.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, Jason Craig is with us. He is editor of Sword and Spade. You can subscribe by going to theswordandspade.com. When we get back, I'm going to ask him about that title for this quarterly print magazine, Why Sword and Spade. I think that's going to be of interest, but also just reflecting upon what Jason is saying there. Doesn't that strike you as true from your own experience? That experience of sitting back with something that you are reading a paragraph, and then being able to just kind of put it down for a moment, kind of look into the distance and be pondering what you're reading. How often does that happen when you're reading an article from your phone, right? It really doesn't lend itself to that. But when you're reading something in your hands, a real print periodical, it does. It's kind of interesting. We're going to be right back on The Simple Truth. Stay tuned.
Are you holding on to an old car or truck because you think dealers won't want it? Then consider donating it to the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network. This is a great way to turn your unvalued vehicle into a powerful gift for Catholic radio. You'll be taking part in our evangelization efforts to continue spreading Christ's love throughout the world. Our Lord uses Catholic radio to draw more people to Himself, and one of the best ways to support the Station of the Cross is by contributing to our vehicle donation program. The process is safe and simple. Your generosity will greatly benefit our mission to bring the truths of the Catholic faith to countless listeners. To find out more or to donate your vehicle today, visit thestationofthecross.com or call 1-866-628-CARS. That's thestationofthecross.com or 1-866-628-2277.
Each weekday from 10 to 11 a.m. Eastern, the Station of the Cross brings you Mother Miriam Live.
What do we mean by the end of man? By the end of man, we mean the purpose for which he was created, namely to know, love, and serve God.
Tune in from 10 to 11 a.m. Eastern for Mother Miriam Live on the Station of the Cross and our free iCatholic Radio mobile app. You can also watch the video stream every day on Facebook or on YouTube.
As a nonprofit lay organization financially independent from your diocese, our apostolate is listener-supported. Through your generosity, we are able to inspire countless listeners with the gospel message and help lead them to a parish to be spiritually nourished by the sacraments. The Station of the Cross thanks our supporters who have enabled us to broadcast Catholic programs for more than 20 years. Thank you for your continued support, and may God bless you and your family.
Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here on Catholic Family Men Monday on The Simple Truth. Our guest is Jason Craig, Catholic husband and father, co-founder and executive director for Fraternus, building brotherhood to mentor boys into virtuous Catholic men, fraternus.net. Also editor of Sword and Spade, a men's quarterly print magazine for Catholic men primarily, but there's value certainly for any man that would pick it up. Theswordandspade.com is where you can find it. And that's what we're talking about in particular right now. In the first segment, Jason, you were talking about the need for this magazine, Sword and Spade. Can you share with us a little bit about the deeper meaning, the meaning behind the title, sword and spade. What is that all about?
Yeah, well, one, I mean, men are very physical, task-oriented creatures. And one of the things we love is our tools, right? We love our tools. Tools are an extension of our strength. And even to the intellectual, somebody occupied completely with intellectual works, they still have the tools of their trade, right? And that is something that we uniquely and especially we harness. And a lot of times our tools are related to our profession, what we do, which is what we are. And one of the things I love in Scripture is when they speak of that God is a warrior, right? God is a warrior. So what is the tool of the warrior? The tool of the warrior is the sword. I think that's something that men are easily drawn to. They easily understand because when you love something, you're willing to fight for it, right? So to have and to wield a sword, figuratively or not, is not a sheer act of violence, but it's a show of love. That we defend and defend what we care for because we care about it. As Chesterton said, the greatest warrior, he fights for what's behind him, not what's in front of him. And it's just the necessary state of this world that we have to fight. We have to defend ourselves. And God is a warrior, so we have that as an obvious image for the magazine. But, however, I am significantly more excited when we talk about and I think this is the bigger challenge when we're talking about the world of men and apostolates to men, is the spade. And the idea of the spade came from when I was reading. Well, one, it's a good alliteration, so you'll remember the title. But when I was reading a book by Wendell Berry, and he was talking about the Odyssey. And when Odysseus returns to Ithaca, his home island that he's supposed to be the king of, the whole island is in total disarray. His son is being bullied and wimpified by this group of usurpers and people these men trying to woo his mother away from Odysseus, and his mother's completely disconnected from what the needs of her son. She's unable to father him. There's no father in the room. His storehouse is being used up by these people. There's just all sorts of disorder in this country. And Odysseus disguises himself and comes upon his father, and his father is spading a tree. And Wendell Berry talks about when things are the craziest, you have to go back to cultivating what's right underneath you. So the spade is the symbol of cultivation. It's the symbol of, and when I say cultivation, it has the same, it's the same root word as culture, same root word as cult, which is where the meaning worship, not like cult in the bad sense, but cult as in worship is the same root as cultivate, which is to work, which is the same root as culture, which is our way of life. So we men can't walk around just slashing at every threat and cutting off, I like the image. We can't be Peter cutting off the guard's ear every day. I mean, there's just so many people doing that all the time, just swinging their sword around. In some ways, I think I remember being younger in my family and just loving things like just apologetics and getting in arguments over the faith and the truth or whatever. Maybe some men are drawn to like physically fighting. Maybe they're into MMA or whatever, jiu-jitsu and all these. These are good things. They're not bad things. But you learn as you become a father and you get older that the harder work is establishing and cultivating the order in your own home, in yourself, in your community, and that's hard work. So, as I said, God is a warrior, yes, but Jesus says, Deus meus agricola est, which is often translated as my father's a vine dresser, right? But it's the literal translation of the Vulgate is my father's a farmer, that my father tends to the seeds that he's planted. And that's really the work of the father. So Aquinas often speaks of fatherhood and its twofold actions. And that is obviously planting the seed of life, but that's just the beginning of fatherhood. It's the tending to the growth of that plant, right? That thing that you've planted. Tending to its growth is kind of that secondary, even more important act of the father. So if we're just out defending and railing against our enemies all the time, but we're not cultivating ourselves, our homes, our communities, we're missing something massive about what it means to be a man, particularly in our leadership in this area when it comes to setting the tone and the culture of things. So there's there's so many things in society, and perhaps this is a lens and a hermeneutic that I am excessive in, but I can't help but look for the father factor in everything that you read about. I mean, someone said, "Oh, I can't believe they go to a football game. I can't believe they let these cheerleaders wear that and dance like that in front of all the fans." And I look around and I think to myself, when did the fathers not find it appropriate for all of us to stand up as fathers, walk down in the field, put our coat around our daughters, inform the coach that we will not be paying for them to do this anymore, and marching them off the field so they're not parading in an over-sexualized manner in front of our friends and community. I mean, just little things like that. The way that it occurs in this slow incremental decaying of culture is because men aren't using the spade. They're distracted, and they're just not active in their own dominion, their own place. They're aloof, or they don't care. They're just surrendering. So in that sense, we think of, we've got to fight with the sword. I just think the greater work, that's easy. I think the sword is easier. It's easier to recognize and slice an enemy, figuratively, but it's harder to do the hard work of cultivating culture. So that's the spade.
Yeah, great images. I mean, at the very least, that image of the spade is much less talked about, for sure. I haven't heard of that image in the way that you present it here before. But even that idea of cultivation, not as much do you hear about that when it comes to apostolates to men, ministry to men, as you hear about the sword and the need to fight and all of that. And there's great need there, for sure. But yeah, to those images, sword and spade, very, very powerful. And this is also the title of a quarterly print magazine. Jason Craig, the editor of this magazine, is with us. theswordandspade.com is where you can get it. You can subscribe there. Jason, tell us, is this something that certainly men who are listening right now, I would think already enough has been said that would whet their appetite, and they'd head on over perhaps and say, that's enough for me. I want to subscribe to this and learn more. But what about if there are women listening, or somebody who knows somebody and they're like, I know a guy who he would love this. He's not listening right now. Can people go ahead and subscribe? Can they get subscriptions for other people if they go to theswordandspade.com? Is that fine?
Yeah, I will say, you caught me on the spot here. The short answer is yes. Very soon we will have that. We're switching this background stuff, payment methods to make it easier to give gift subscriptions. But there is a way you can go on there and give multiple gift subscriptions. And to your other point, we have found the magazine itself. So it's not meant to be read and just in isolation and enjoyed. We intend this to be a food for conversation amongst men to discuss difficult things. And they're not abstract ideas. I mean, there's an article in here that's very good about usury, lending at interest, which is a sin condemned perennially by the church. But we men might not have really considered or thought about, well, what's the difference between investment and usury, and how can we? So, we have articles on the morality and the how we understand things like retirement, our own work, our own craft, our competency in learning how to do things. Anyway, these things are meant to be enjoyed in conversation. But to the point about what's been interesting about women reading is that women, they oftentimes get it in the mail and they read it all before their husband gets it. And there seems to be something there about the need, going back to the spade, of worthwhile, meaningful conversation with our wives outside of just the functionality of, doing whatever this or that with the kids. That in some ways, children, when we have a bunch of them in particular, they can become such a driving force in the direction of our home that we as husbands and wives aren't cultivating between us a true Christian friendship, which includes discussing truth, mulling over these things together, learning from one another, discussing, arguing even in a helpful way, hopefully. That I think women are also longing for that with their husbands and vice versa. So there's a lot of really good things that we've just found. We almost want to just call it, sword and spade for fathers and their households, because it tends to be something that's very helpful. That yes, the father's leading it; they pertain to him because he is downstream of so many things. What I mean by that is, you hear this argument: is culture downstream of politics, or is politics downstream of culture? And I like to say, it doesn't matter. Dad's downstream of all of it, right? If whether tax policy to the latest whatever being proposed to his children, to immigration, fathers in the reality of their day-to-day life really have to deal with a whole lot of this and as heads of the home in a way that's unique. But providing the entire household a way to discuss and talk about it helps him. It augments him in his role, and I think it gives something, for that whole household to think about in the same way as we mean this to be discussed and cultivated within a community. That begins in the home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what you're talking about also makes me think of men being able to gather without necessarily having some sort of program or curriculum. They could gather around an article and, come having read the article, or even bring the article and just start reading through it, talking it over together. I remember I went to a group like that once. A friend invited me. I think it was Communio. And we were looking at a theological article at a pub, having a beer with a few guys, and that was pretty enjoyable. Just a way to help the men to go deeper in the conversation. Can you say a word about tying this in with your work with Fraternus and how this all fits in with that?
Yeah, well, that was Sword and Spade was designed originally for our men within Fraternus, and those guys. The idea behind Fraternus is that. Any problems that we have with boys in society is a problem we have with men, right? We kind of had to mature and understand what was happening if we were going to say, all right, we're going to mentor boys into virtuous Catholic men. Okay, well, that means we have to start with the men. And then we realized, wow, the men don't have community amongst themselves. And that brotherhood is a necessary part of Christianity. It's not an optional part. I mean, you read the New Testament, the amount of times that loving the brotherhood and serving the brotherhood is mentioned is endless. It's a word. I mean, I'm sorry, not endless. That's excessive, but it's there, constant, consistently. So within Fraternus, the most important thing we do is cultivating brotherhood amongst the men. Well, what are we going to do? Get there and go through some program? No, let's have a discussion about truth. Truth in our Lord Jesus Christ is what's going to unite us. So let's talk about and wrestle with, and perhaps even, God bless us, argue over the truth for a while, and that'll make us better men.
Yes, Jason Craig is with us. He's going to be back with us right after this break. In the meantime, if you have a question or comment, if you want to call in on this topic that we're talking about today with regard to Sword and Spade, theswordandspade.com is where you can subscribe. Do you have a question about that? Anything that has already been put forward that you want to comment on? Anything else regarding what it means to be a virtuous Catholic man, to raise up our boys, to raise up even our daughters, anything with this regard of fatherhood, being the best father, being the best husband and father that we can be, to really answer that calling, fulfill our vocation well. 1-877-511-5483. That's 1-877-511-5483. We'll be right back.
This is Life News Radio. I'm Jim Anderson. A district attorney elected with support from billionaire George Soros has squared off with Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. DeSantis has suspended State Attorney Andrew Warren for failing to prosecute laws like Florida's 15-week abortion ban. Critics of such arrangements say that states vest veto power in governors, not in prosecutors and not in their campaign donors. Texas AG Ken Paxton wants a federal court in Lubbock to block one of President Biden's schemes to enable abortion practice in all 50 states. The White House wants to use a law that requires ER departments to stabilize indigent patients to instead require doctors to stabilize some pregnancies with abortion. Another tactic to neutralize state abortion restrictions comes from Senator Patty Murray of Washington State. Her bill to federally bar prosecution of abortionists failed in the U.S. Senate Thursday. This is Life News Radio. What is the one failure that comes before every elective abortion? It is a failure on the part of two people, a man and a woman, to understand their true vocation, their true calling by God as to how they should use their entire life for Him and for others. So pray for an end to abortion, but pray also that human souls would find their true and holy vocation. In other stories, researcher Dr. Michael New is offering 3 key lessons behind the failure of a pro-life Kansas initiative Tuesday, and 1,000 children born last year are alive in Poland thanks to a law eliminating abortion in cases of children tested and suspected with a disability. Pro-life doctors are quick to note a high rate of error in such testing. For pro-life headlines delivered to your email address daily, sign up at lifenews.com. This has been Life News Radio.
Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today, Jason Craig, Catholic husband and father, co-founder and executive director for Fraternus, fraternus.net, editor of Sword and Spade, a men's quarterly print magazine, theswordandspade.com, editor of thosecatholicmen.com, founder of St. Joseph's Farm, stjosephsfarm.com, and author of Leaving Boyhood Behind, Reclaiming Catholic Brotherhood, published by our Sunday Visitor, OSV.com. A lot of great resources here flowing from Jason Craig, our guest today. And if you want to call in about any one of these things or anything else with regard to our topic of just being a virtuous Catholic man, feel free to call in now, 1-877-511-5483. That's 1-877-511-5483. All right, Jason. So in one of your latest articles in Sword and Spade, it's on the virtue of justice. It's entitled Just Confusion. You explain why the word justice is so abused and confused outside of a Christian society. Can you break that open a bit for us and give us some of the main points?
No, you have to get the magazine. Sorry. Next topic.
Give us a taste.
Just kidding. Well, yeah, I think you're probably intuiting rightly that we live in a post-Christian society. So the funny things that occur with language is that people use Christian language still to describe things, very often as they oppose what is treasured and known to be true by the faith, right? So it's this contradiction. And sadly, I think what happens with that is even us as Catholics, we lose hold of our own words, and we allow them to be abused and trivialized, and then we become squeamish when we hear the words. I gave a talk the other day on a Catholic thing, and this, I can't remember the talk, and this guy is a friend of mine. He goes, "Yeah, that sounds, it sounds real commie, like the common destination of all goods." It sounds communist, is what he was saying. You sound like a lefty or something. And it was an example of we have allowed our language to be co-opted, and we don't use it correctly ourselves, and then we just let them use it. No, the problem with that, Jim, is if we don't have our words to communicate this truth, that's difficult. Coming up with whole new ones doesn't seem like a wise idea. That'll get convoluted. So we need to defend and know what we're talking about. So justice is particularly one of those. I mean, when the call for justice, what people mean by that is they want some sort of, they mean lots of things by that, but it typically means they want their idea of the way society should be ordered to be enacted, or they have, and this would be more accurate to what justice actually is, they have a sense of something that has been done that is wrong, and they would like to see it made right, which is justice. But what they seem to, the way it actually manifests, and what do you mean by that, is they would just like their laws to be passed or their politics to be embraced. I'm trying to think of you could probably think of an example of, things like environmental justice. There's a good example. Environmental justice. That's an example where the word justice is applied wrongly. Justice regulates the interactions between man with man. There are other words that talk about, no, that does not mean that we don't owe respect and reverence to the earth itself, but that's because God created it. So if there was going to be environmental justice, it's actually would come from the virtue of religion, which is a sub-virtue of justice, which is the reason we would care for the earth, is that it's not ours, and that it was a gift from God, and that to treat it poorly, just as a father would not give his children something, although, I can look out my window right now and see toys and things I've bought my children, and it's enraging to see them mistreated. So if we were to talk about environmental justice, we would actually be talking about reverence for God and the virtue of religion. So in this, what I go through in my article is trying to talk about or discussing, where does justice come from? What is it? The short answer is it recognizes the equality amongst men as being equal in the sense of created by God. Does not refer to being equal as having the same things or doing the same things. In fact, justice requires hierarchy. So it's interesting that I think in our political climate, people use the sense of justice as a leveling force, trying to make us all the same. But in order to have justice, you actually have to have authorities that enact justice, right? When you say, we want justice, from whom? They don't want to say from authority, but that's where justice comes from. A father enacts justice in his home when his children misbehave and he punishes them. That is an act of justice, not just of teaching them through, discipline, which is what discipline means teaching, but also if they do something wrong against someone, well, there needs to be an act of justice to make right this imbalance that they've created in the home. We have to make this right. So that's what people want to do. But to do that, to have justice, you need authority. You need strong authority, which is why this is in our political climate. What's funny is you might hear justice and think of the law and think of police. Other people might hear of justice and think of getting rid of the police, in which case I get really nervous over what they mean by justice, because it sounds more like mob justice, which always degrades into all sorts of debaucheries. So in the article, I pull completely from St. Thomas Aquinas, and he makes very clear justice has to do with man and man. It has to do with actions, what we do one towards one another, and it has to do with what we own by right. And that's twofold. I have things that I possess, and they're my right. And we have equal. You have your right, things that you possess. I have my rights, things that I possess. And we come to those possessions, and they're different degrees. And, so Aquinas leaves room for a king is going to possess different things from a peasant. But their right to possess what is rightfully theirs, you can't infringe that. And the moment you take from them, you have committed an act of injustice. So some sort of imbalance of the equality. So if you take from me I'll show it on the webcam here. I guess some of your viewers can see this. My flip phone. Well, you might not know how hard it is for me to come across flip phones. I have to practically persuade the people at the phone store to give me a flip phone. If you steal it from me, boom, we now have something that did not exist in the world before that moment, which is an imbalance of our equality. You have deprived me of something that is mine. So that's an injustice, and that's the simple. All injustice is some sort of taking of a possession, right? And the only way to make it right is to give that thing back. That's the only way to make it right. And not giving back extra. So justice is 0, and injustice is -1. It's not +3. Well, you had an injustice, so now I need 3 more phones. Nope. Justice is to give back my phone. Virtues like generosity and charity, they might give me more than I deserve. That might be wonderful, and depending on the situation. But justice gives me back what is mine. So in society, all these people talk about an injustice. What was taken? That is something we have to ask. What was deprived of someone? And how do we actually return it to them? So there might actually be, for example, very serious cases to be made about the injustices around slavery. How to make that right now at this point is extremely complicated, because if you deprive a man of his freedom, well, the simplest act of justice is to give him back his freedom. But if you've also, in your society's understanding, deprived him of other goods that he's not possessed of, well, how do you give those things back? It's very complicated. But just justice and throwing money around and that's very difficult to know what it is. So Joseph Pieper puts it this way: that one man gives to another what belongs to the other is the basis of all just order in the world. In contrast, all injustice means that what belongs to someone is either withheld or taken from him, not indeed by misfortune, not bad harvest, not fire, not earthquake, but by man. That's how justice and injustice occurs. And the reason it's so important for us as Christians is all of our acts are measured on whether or not they're sins or not, on whether or not they're just or not. The root of the word is jus, which is Latin for right. All right action is just action. All unjust action is wrong action. So you have a mind, you have a body. You think about what needs to be done, and the first cardinal virtue of prudence leads you to take action. I'm going to take action. Well, what is the measure, Jim, of all of our actions? Every action, once it bursts out of our inner man out into the outer man, the measure is how does it affect other people? If you deprive or withhold someone of something that is rightfully theirs, then your act was not just, and therefore it wasn't prudent, and is most likely sinful. So justice is what measures all of our actions. So it's a very serious word for Christians. Particularly though, there's other forms of possessions. Like I have a right. You, Jim Havens, were born with the same right, Jason Craig, to our own name and our reputation. If I were to spread lies about you or reveal faults of you, and Jim, we have a long past in history. Maybe we could drum up we know each other's faults, right? I mean, I've known you since 2009, 10, something like that. Yeah, I don't know if your listeners know that. You and I could probably come up with some faults we know of one another, right? If we were to publicize that, even if they might be true, without a grave need to publicize them, which is very rare, when do you need to proclaim someone's faults? You are taking from that person their reputation. So injustice refers to things like life and property, but also to things like honor, reputation, friendships. So if you are someone who, through your gossiping, destroys friendships, or through your gossiping harms community life, or through your slander or backbite, or some, I listen here, Aquinas is different ones. Backbiting, which is when you secretly injure someone's good name, like, hey, listen to this. There's reviling, where you publicly dishonor a person by making fun of them in public. There's tale-bearing, which is where you like to tell stories about people to try to break up or weaken a friendship. There's derision. Actually, that's making fun of somebody. Reviling is just using your words in public to cause harm to someone. And come on, we're on the internet enough. We're getting into issues of justice a lot of us don't like to talk about, which is every time we speak a word, every time we type something on the internet, every time we take an action, if we are harming someone else's reputation or taking their right to honor away from them, we're stealing something from them. It's an act of injustice, and it's a really hard thing to make right, which is why all these other issues of these sort of intangible injustices are very dangerous. There's a famous story of the saint who someone you probably know who it was. Maybe it's St. Alphonsus Liguori, feast today in the old calendar. Someone came to him and confessed gossiping, and he made them go to a high point in the town and cut open a feather pillow and shake out all the feathers into the wind, and then go retrieve and get all the feathers back, right? That's their penance, because that's how hard and how ferocious our words can damage someone and be hard to retract once the toothpaste is out of the proverbial tube. Sorry, was that a good summary? Was there other things stuck out to you?
No, very, very good. And the article, it's a great one, entitled Just Confusion by Jason Craig. You can find it in the latest edition of Sword and Spade. You can go to theswordandspade.com to subscribe. And again, a quarterly print magazine. You're going to get articles like the one Jason was just describing, laying out, breaking open to us what the virtue of justice is, the cardinal virtue of justice. You can pull it out of your catechism. You can go to the Catechism of the Catholic Church and look up the virtue of justice and read through it and form yourself in that. That's a great thing to do. But this article from Sword and Spade is going to echo forth the teaching of St. Thomas Aquinas, which is pretty much what the Catechism schism is going to be echoing forth as well. So it's all right there. And in this time where, look, what Jason's saying is absolutely true. The left, the political left has absolutely taken this word, taken our language in what justice is, and they use it to push forward evil acts, right? Just look at the ongoing daily mass murder of abortion. They call it reproductive justice. I mean, how absurd. And so we're going to get to this last bit in the article when we get back. I think you're going to really enjoy the conclusion of this article, which is what I want to ask Jason about. But think about how they're tearing down, they want to tear down God, they want to tear down the father of the family, down with the patriarchy. They say it's all of a piece. We're going to be right back. Stay tuned.
Are you holding on to an old car or truck because you think dealers won't want it? Then consider donating it to the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network. This is a great way to turn your unvalued vehicle into a powerful gift for Catholic radio. You'll be taking part in our evangelization efforts to continue spreading Christ's love throughout the world. Our Lord uses Catholic radio to draw more people to Himself, and one of the best ways to support the Station of the Cross is by contributing to our vehicle donation program. The process is safe and simple. Your generosity will greatly benefit our mission to bring the truths of the Catholic faith to countless listeners. To find out more or to donate your vehicle today, visit thestationofthecross.com or call 1-866-628-CARS. That's thestationofthecross.com or 1-866-628-2277.
Hello, this is Father Frank Pavone of Priests for Life. One day the Lord Jesus took Peter, James, and John up on a mountain and was transfigured before their eyes. This was a sign to them that the passion of Jesus was to fulfill the Father's plan for our salvation. It should remind us that every human life is part of the Father's plan and that the glory of God is to be seen in every person. This is Father Frank Pavone, National Director of Priests for Life.
Our bumper magnets are a great way to promote the gospel as proclaimed through Catholic radio. We hear all the time from new listeners who were introduced to the station through a bumper magnet. We'd be happy to send you a bumper magnet so that others can come to know our Lord. Just go to thestationofthecross.com and find our bumper magnet request button under the About tab. That's thestationofthecross.com under the About tab.
The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today, Jason Craig, Catholic husband and father, co-founder and executive director for Fraternus, fraternus.net, and editor of Sword and Spade, a men's Catholic quarterly print magazine for all men, truly, but certainly for Catholic men striving to live the faith, looking to fulfill their vocation as husband and father. This is for you. This is highly recommended. You can go to theswordandspade.com to subscribe, theswordandspade.com. And it's what we've been talking about for the bulk of the show today. You can go back and you can find the show, listen to the podcast if you've missed some of it to learn a little bit more. But we've been talking most immediately about the article that Jason has in the newest edition of the Sword and Spade, and that's Just Confusion on the Virtue of Justice. I just want to read how this article ends. And as we were talking about that image of the spade earlier, Jason broke that open so beautifully and wonderfully, and maybe we haven't given sufficient attention to the sword, which is still a much needed image. Well, I think the conclusion of this article gets us back to that. Listen to this. Jason writes, "Might doesn't make right. It crushes it. This shows that we cannot converse with a tyrant and call it dialogue. There are enemies of justice that must be defeated. Yes, we will have compassion and empathy for the victims of tyrants, but the enemy must be named without embarrassment. And because they attack those things that are truly ours, family, life, property, and tradition, we have every right to fight them." And that it's there that the article concludes. Jason, it's a strong ending. What are your thoughts in ending it that way? Anything more you want to say about that?
Yeah, well, you and I discussed this the other day. I talked to you because of your pro-life work. Right now, we're working on an issue. We in Sword and Spade, we do not do a lot of issues on current events, ecclesial or civil, dealing much more in truth itself practically applied within the home. So just it's not that we're not dealing with things that are relevant. It's just that we're not following the news cycle to take our cues. Except this next one, we are we're going to have an issue on Dobbs. And I had a fascinating conversation this morning with the overturning of Roe v. Wade. A fascinating conversation with my co-editor, and he was talking about this issue of language, of justice being our word. And he was accused. And so the challenge we're having with this issue is that so many of our authors, we have been programmed to begin a so-called dialogue without talking about the evil reality of abortion, where we have learned to temper all of our talk about Dobbs with, well, now we have to make sure that we take care of life. We can't just care about babies up till birth. We've got to make sure we're there to support the family. All these things. And he said, I've realized we have the Stockholm syndrome, which is where you begin to empathize and think like and have sympathy for your tyrant, for your the one holding you captive, and you begin to think like them. In this case, the way we're thinking like them is we hear in our head the mantras of, look at us, Jim, two white guys talking on Catholic radio about abortion. What do we know? We can't speak of this. This doesn't affect you. This isn't my body. We know them all. My body, my choice. How you only care about them up till birth, which is hilarious in my case because I have so many children. I wish I only cared about them up till birth. I love them. I can't help it. All these charges, we will begin conversing in dialogue as if they can be converted. Now, we know of beautiful stories like Abby Johnson and other people where people do have a conversion. But when it comes to the reality of abortion, this is not a place of dialogue. This is a place of absolutely not. This will not happen. I had a family member of mine, and this was someone very close to me, and she found herself pregnant at a young age. And someone came to me and said, well, we're having a dialogue about the choices that are available. We know what that meant. I said, absolutely not. She's coming to live with me. She'll have the baby here. She's not going to have it there. She's going to have it here. There are certain times where we need to stop with acting as if we can dialogue with these people. We can't. And by saying these people, I'm not dehumanizing them on the other side, on the political left in our country. But what I am saying is that I'm shifting modes here, and I'm picking up the sword, and I'm saying, no, I will defend life because you are murdering children. So my co-editor was saying, we have the Stockholm complex. We don't realize that. So what we're doing in this issue is we're celebrating the pro-life heroes that got us to this point. Not in winning an argument, but in saving human lives from murder. We're allowed to be excited. He said, we're allowed to spike this football because what we're trying to do is celebrate the overturning of Roe versus Wade. Yes, we know there's a long war ahead, but we won this battle. It would be like the soldiers from Lepanto returning from defeating the Ottoman Empire, this massive army. We never thought we could have won this battle. And they return and everyone says, come on here and for the huddle. We need to talk about the rest of the war. No, we need to celebrate this massive moment, which is the overturning of an unjust law that was killing people. So anyway, yes, I end the article because I am a big fan of, we've been talking about this in this magazine, a big fan of conversation, big fan of dialogue. These things, I know they're cliches. They actually lead you to higher truth. That's why the Summa, classic catechisms, they're all written in conversational form, right? That is how we learn things, in conversation and even arguing with people. But there are cases where we must simply fight and say absolutely not. And that's why we have a right to do that. I think in the area of abortion is where we have the Stockholm syndrome, where we use the language of our captors and allow them to use it, where we try to offer these, nuanced and gentle things. And there are times for that. I mean, when you're counseling the victims, right, as I said in that, when you're counseling the victims of abortion, that is the place of utter and total compassion and care. obviously. When it comes to those profiting from the murder of children in your own country, they are the enemy, and you must fight them because they are taking something that is not theirs. That's what injustice does. It takes something that is not theirs to take. They are thieves, and the worst kind of thieves, of course, are murderers, those that take the life of the innocent, particularly. That was the ending of that article. I was relating back to the opening, and my main point, which is atheists like Friedrich Nietzsche were honest. That I appreciate Nietzsche's. So if you don't know who Nietzsche is, he is the famous God is dead philosopher. And that actually comes from a so-called parable that he wrote. And he has a madman go into a room and he says, "Where's God? Where's God? I'm looking for him." And everyone starts making fun of him because, hey, this is a secular age. Maybe God is sleeping. Maybe he's on vacation. Maybe you've got to, yell louder for him. And he scolds all of them and says, "You don't even know what you've done." Yes, and Nietzsche believed this. God is dead. I mean, he said he was an atheist by intuition. He didn't reason his way to atheism. Most atheists pretend they reason their way to it. They don't. It's just, Nietzsche says, it's just this gut feeling I have that we're going to live without God now. But I know what that actually means. What that actually means is there is no right order anymore. We have disrupted the entire order of the world. And he knew that. He said, he talks about this, are we not plunging continually backward, sideward, forward, in all directions? Is there still any up or down? Are we not straying as through an infinite nothing? Do we not feel the breath of empty space? Has it not become colder? Is not night continually closing in on us? He knew that by getting rid of God, you've disrupted everything. And he also knew that the only way to gain power in the future is not a just order in bringing things into right hierarchy of justice, but in being mighty enough to crush your enemies. And that's something that we can't allow the secular and atheist society to do when it comes to things like abortion and the right to life.
All right, Jason Craig, it's been a blessing to have you with us today. Again, Sword and Spade is what we've been talking about for the bulk of the episode, a quarterly print magazine. You can go subscribe at theswordandspade.com. That pro-life issue will be coming out in the next quarter, Jason. Would that be right?
That's the next issue. Yep, this fall.
All right. Something to look forward to. I think it's going to be a good one, much to consider, much to discuss. But Jason, great blessing to have you with us today. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jim. Always a pleasure.
All right. For everybody else, if you have any comments on the show, feel free to email jimh@thestationofthecross.com.
My name is Nathan Wigfield,